Okay, so good morning, everybody. Bom dia, todo mundo. Vou falar em inglês, mas depois também qualquer coisa que vocês quiserem entender melhor, ou se quiserem fazer perguntas em português, podem fazer, a gente traduz, tá? Porque a palestra vai ser em inglês, mas a gente se comunica, ok? I was just telling them that we will be talking in English, and that if anybody wants to make questions in Portuguese, that's okay. What's important is that we can communicate with each other, isn't it? Okay. So I am very, very, very happy to introduce you to Professor Fred Niederman, who will be our keynote speaker today. I will just read a little bit about Dr. Niederman's resume. Dr. Fred Niederman serves as Socio-technical, I think I have pronounced it well, Socio-technical endowed professor at St. Louis University, United States. He was selected as a fellow of the Association for Information Systems in 2020. You probably not know, but Association for Information Systems is a very big academic, scientific and academic association, specifically in information systems in the world, okay? He served as editor-in-chief for communications of Association for Information Systems, which is a journal from AIS, a very important journal for AIS. He has more than 30,000 downloads of his papers with ACM Digital Library. Let me repeat, 30,000 downloads from his papers, and more than 10,000 with the AIS Digital Library, what sums up 40,000 downloads of his papers. He has more than 5,200 citations in Google Scholar, and he recently published a monograph on process theory with Now Publishing. His work on the coevolution of IT worker skills and generations of technology platforms received a publication of the year by the AIS, Association for Information Systems. His areas of research interest include futurist studies, that's so good for us, IS personnel, IS project management, and philosophy of science applied to IS. He has served as senior editor for Journal of AIS, selected twice as senior editor of the year. He has served as program chair for the International Conference on IS in 2010, and as a member of the International Conference of Information Systems Doctoral Consortium faculty members in 2018. And he is recognized as a member of the Circle of Compadres of the KMPG PhD project. So we have an excellent opportunity of having the time to share and to receive a little bit of the experience and knowledge of Professor Niederman, who is a very, 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 very senior person in IS. And not only that, but also a very nice person that I had the chance to personally meet last year in the Americas Conference on Information Systems. And he is a literature lover, isn't it, Professor? Yeah. And we will also have Professor Niederman as the honorary chair of the Americas Conference on Information Systems that will happen in 2027 in Brazil, here in our country, in São Paulo. And we are very happy with that too. Thank you very much, Fred, for coming. And please feel free to share your knowledge with us. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my honor and privilege. Oh, thank you. There's a little time delay, so you'll hear what I said before, kind of. There's a fellow way in the back to the right of my screen, but probably to the left of your seating. Could you raise your hand if you hear me? Okay, excellent. Excellent. I didn't see his hand, but it's enough people.
We don't have delay on your voice.
Oh.
We hear exactly when you talk. It's okay.
Oh, great. That's wonderful because I get a delay coming back or something. I just wanted to add a couple of personal notes to the delightful introduction that Renata provided. And one is I grew up in a mostly Mexican American neighborhood in California when I was in high school and earlier. So I can tell when people are saying naughty things to me in Spanish, but probably not in Portuguese. So if it's close to Spanish, I may understand. But if it's not, feel free to say anything that you want. I will have a slide shortly. I'll put my slides up shortly. I sadly never learned any Portuguese. And even the small things I had that I have coming up are all thanks to Google Translate. So hopefully, because I don't know if it's correct, right? So hopefully they translated what I meant, and we'll see. If I get lots of laughter and finger pointing, we'll know that they were having fun with me, and that there's really a comedian doing the translating and not an AI system. I've been a professor of MIS since 1990. I'm guessing, looking out at you, that's before about a third or so of you were born. So you can imagine that things that you grew up with and are just part of the environment did not even exist when I was your age. For example, I was a graduate student when IBM came out with, and Apple came out with the first personal desktop computers. I can't imagine a world without desktop computers, which are now almost obsolete in a way, right? Because everybody has tablets and laptop computers. So we talk a lot about generations and different generations of people working, being technical savvy, what's called digital natives. And there's a lot of truth to this, even though I think in many ways we're all the same and that there's so much variance within each generation that it's easy to lose track of our commonalities. But I'm already getting off topic. I have about 16 slides that I prepared, and on average, I spend about an hour per slide. So I hope you're very comfortable. And I hope there's food left over from your last break for when we get into the next time. I'm now going to see if I can remember how to share my screen with you.
Well, you can share the whole screen if you want.
Is that showing up?
Or just the PowerPoint screen?
Is it showing?
Yes, now you can choose the PowerPoint. Yes, and put it on present. Perfect. We can see. Perfect.
Is it okay? All right. Excellent. Thank you.
Yes, it is.
I actually, as I prepared these slides, I don't know why, but in my mind, I expected an older group. Maybe it's the name Society for Computing But I put in a lot of things that I thought, I don't know if this happens to you, but something that I learned 30 years ago, I think that everybody now knows. And it's just because I've known it a long time, not because everybody's been exposed to it. So I'm going to share a lot of things that are not the newest, but they may be new to you. And I apologize if I repeat things that you are already quite familiar with. I don't know how to pronounce it, but obrigado por ter vindo, which I think means
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you.
thank you for coming. This one, again, I'm hoping that Google Translate, actually, I think Renata may have sent me this one, but I hope that this one is clear. Please, if you have questions. Now, I don't see any of you now. I only see my slides. So if you have a question, let Renata know, and either she'll translate into English or just ask me in English, and it's fine. I can answer you in Portuguese, but my Portuguese is non-existent, so it may be an answer to a different question. I have a quick story. The first time I was teaching in Mexico, I had a Spanish teacher write a welcome paragraph, and I memorized it phonetically by its sound. I have no idea what it really meant. And I looked out at the audience, and nobody laughed because it was very funny. So I looked at the translator was there, and I asked the translator to translate my Spanish into real Spanish, and everybody laughed. So I realized they understood English just fine and much better than my efforts at Spanish. Okay, so ask questions anytime you want. The main theme that I'd like to talk with you about today pertains to a concept called socio-technical systems. Now, socio-technical systems refer to a fundamental way of thinking about computing. It's a combination of social human concerns with the technology itself. And I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about what that means, why that's important, and what some of the challenges are in trying to do that. Now, for people in practice, people that are working with technology in an IT department, or what we used to call a power user, meaning someone in accounting or marketing who's very good at the technology and helps other people. It provides a way of helping to think about the human and the technical as both parts of one system. For academics, it's a way of categorizing different types of research. And as we'll talk about, that means asking different sorts of questions. My view, the difference between, say, biology and chemistry is mostly about what domains they're interested in, which means what kind of questions they ask. A biologist may ask, why do camels have big humps? Or why do cats sleep in the day and hunt at night? Or a chemist might ask, why do some proteins interact with DNA and other proteins not? Actually, that's probably biochemistry, somewhere between the two. But others will say, what's the difference? Why does calcium and magnesium bond together to create salt? Or whatever it does create. I'm neither a chemist nor a biologist, so I'm just guessing. So for academics, it's a way to sort of divide up the territories that we're interested in, because On the one hand, I believe on faith that everything is connected. That as you get into smaller and smaller units, you begin to study the components of everything. And as you get into larger and larger, you study the single things that all interconnect. But that's just a belief that I have personally. I clearly don't know if that's true, but it's been a useful belief for me, which is one of the underlying messages that I would like to convey, is that many people think of science as a search for truth. But those of you who've taken calculus will remember what's called limits. And when you have an angle or a curve, you never have an exact slope. You always approach a slope at a given point. But you can approach it closer to closer, where you essentially have the slope at a point on a curve, but you never can really have that. It's another belief of mine regarding science. We never have truth in the same way we never have the absolute slope of a point on a curve. But we can come closer and closer. As we come closer, our ideas about what that slope is, or what that truth is, or what it would be if we could know it, becomes more and more helpful. Things that are close to being true are generally more helpful than things that aren't. So science to me is about formulating hypothetical slopes of points on a curve and doing our best to make more and more useful descriptions of what those slopes are. And when I say slope, I mean this metaphorically for truth, where the truth might pertain to the effectiveness of a technology or the willingness of a person to use the technology. And we'll talk about both of those as socio-technical studies. Now, why am I saying this? I assume that all of you are studying or teaching something to do with computing. And I believe that a socio-technical approach is the central part of information systems, or a central way to look at it. Not to say that other ways are wrong, but to say that this has a particular kind of value, both in research and in practice for people. And my belief, again, is that we as a field or a set of fields, computing, information systems, organizational behavior, social psychology, will survive and thrive and grow if we provide knowledge that's useful and accessible to people. Sadly, that's not always the most publishable, but that pertains to the reality of being an academic rather than to the ideal of what I believe academics ought to strive for. So what is a socio-technical focus? Socio-technical systems can be viewed as a type of system. Now, because it includes the socio, which refers to social, people, groups, teams, it's always an open system. Again, it's my belief that there is free will and not determinism. Again, it's a belief. It's served me well. People I know who believe in determinism often feel you must act as if there's free will because we can't know what's determined. So we have to act as ethically and as ethically and humanely as we can, as if the choice is entirely ours, and I believe it is. So because I believe in free will, that means I could never know what any one of you will choose or do next with certainty, because you have the free will to make a choice. Now, most of the time, I believe, humans choose out of habit or momentum. I've had orange juice for breakfast. Well, I haven't actually, but hypothetically, I've had orange juice for breakfast every day this year. So I don't even have to make a choice. I just get it out of the refrigerator, pour it, and drink it. But any given day, I could say, no, today is grapefruit day. Or I may have run out of orange juice. Or for any of uncountable reasons, I may choose not to drink orange juice on a given day, or may just not drink it. I choose to, but I pour it in and I'm distracted and sits there and never gets drunk, etc. I hope you follow my logic here. So there's another way to look at systems, closed and open. A closed system is one where there are two definitions. In biology, a closed system is any system that has inputs and outputs. An open system is any that has inputs and outputs. In behavioral science and science of the artificial, where we build artifacts and test them, like information systems, the closedness of a component is where when you have an input, the output is determined, and where there are no changes in the components within the system. A closed system would be an automobile. We have inputs, oil periodically, air conditioning fluid, gasoline, or if it's battery powered, we have however we charge it with electricity. Maybe we have a solar power on the top. But given that energy, there's a limited range of what it can do. It can turn left, right, go forward, back, speed up, slow down, and that's all. And once you have the inputs defined, the outputs must follow. Now we know with AI, increasingly, systems will give outputs that are new combinations of all of the inputs that have been put in. If we have 100 cases, the recommendation in the next case may be something that does not match any of the 100 inputs. So in a sense, it's creating something new. Now, philosophically, we could debate what kind of system that is, but in effect, we must act on whatever kind of system it becomes, whether it's an open, a closed, or some new hybrid that we've just never experienced before. Because of the inclusion of people as part of the system, a socio-technical system will always be an open system. We'll never be able to define all of the inputs or all of the outputs, because people may make decisions even more unpredictably than the most sophisticated AI can do at this time. Now, in your lifetimes, AI systems may progress to where they have even more unpredictability, hopefully in a positive sense of coming up with better answers than humans would. But for now, humans remain, as best I can tell, more unpredictable than even the most sophisticated computing machine. One of the major concepts is that systems contain components. So one way to look at a socio-technical system is that it has social or human components and computing components. Now, it could be hardware, software, data, procedures, network. all of the elements of information systems are normally included as part of a socio-technical system, or we can just lump all of those into the computer system or the information system. I'll talk in a minute about what the major components and attributes of systems theory includes. Again, I apologize if this is very familiar to you, but we will look at it from a very high level so that we have a common understanding. So a way to look at systems is a collection of components organized in a particular way, such that we can look at each component, but we can also look holistically at what they do when they're organized that they cannot do when the same components are not organized. I like to explain this as the difference between having a Jaguar, not the cat, but the automobile, or having all the parts disassembled for the Jaguar. In a sense, all of the parts are absolutely the same as the assembled Jaguar. But when you add the assembly and the organization, now you can drive around and be really cool, right? You can go up next to some poor bloke in a Volkswagen, give some naughty sign and then race off and laugh and impress all your friends. This is very fun to do, and you can't do it when all the people are sitting on your garage floor. So adding the organization to the components changes them from components to one whole system. Now, each component is worth looking at and making better. I especially on automobiles like brakes, because I love stopping when I need to, when there's a red light, for example. Stopping is one of my favorite things about driving. With computer systems, the hardware is a component. You can't do anything without some kind of hardware, whether it's a mobile device or what we used to call mainframe computers that you probably read about in your history books. It's also the network, not just the wires, but the software that runs the network, that breaks down your message using the 7-level OSI stack to translate the words I'm saying into zeros and ones, move across the wires and through the air so that you're hearing exactly what I'm saying. It's really a miracle. I mean, especially if you were born, which none of you were probably, before any of this stuff was invented. I actually was not born before the mainframe, but really close. There were probably 30 of them in the world when I was born. And each one had less computing power than the cell phone each of you have, and might be playing games on even as I speak. Probably not, though. So here are just a few of the key concepts that go along with systems. The first is purpose. Systems, another way to divide up systems is into artificial and natural. Now, a natural system, I believe, exists in the sense that we're looking at framing something that happens in nature, but not really changing it. I would argue, though, that when we designate a lot of trees as a forest, the forest is an artificial system. The trees themselves are just out there growing. We have what's called cicadas. They're a bug that comes up every 13 years, and millions of them transform our forests into homes for cicadas. Some people actually grind them up and put them in ice cream. I know in Spanish that's helado, but I don't know what it is in Portuguese. I'm sorry. And I don't try that. I'm a little bit squeamish. Now, a forest has a purpose. We manage forests. We use wood for paper or for houses. We try to manage how much is taken versus how much is planted. The forests create oxygen. I know you all know this because the Amazon basin is obviously a well-known entity in Brazil. You know, I didn't know this, but apparently the largest forest in the world is not the Amazon rainforest, but one in Canada, which surprisingly is burning down at a very fast rate, sadly enough. But that's just a little side note. Now, when we make something like an information system, it's very clear that we have to purposely make it. This system I'm talking to you from has components like my camera, my microphone, my screen that shows me what I'm doing, PowerPoint, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These all have to be organized in a particular way. And thankfully, all I have to do is plug in on my side and it all works. Renata sent me the link. I clicked on it. We tested for 5 minutes and that's it. The amount that we can now do with the intricate information systems for a person my age is just like magic. It's like going back to the first Star Trek and seeing these things as fantasy, and about half of them are now implemented. My favorite one is the translator. When I was in Mexico last time, it didn't happen in Panama, but in Mexico, the taxi driver typed something in Spanish. He showed it to me on his Apple phone. It said to me in English, "Do you want to go to the bathroom?" All I had to do is say, "Sí." I don't know if that's the same in Portuguese, but you probably know what I mean. And then we got off to the next stop, and all was well in, halfway between Mexico City and Puebla. So my point just is that, I would have had to gesture, 10 years ago. But now, I mean, eventually we're going to have university classes where I can speak in English and 15 people can have it instantly translated in 15 languages and maybe to listen to it, like watching a movie. The second thing, so every system has a purpose. Now, the purpose it's designed for may be different than the purpose I use it for. My old advisor, when I was a doctoral student, called this faithfulness. She felt that a user was obligated to use a system faithfully to how it was designed. But of course, we know from things like social media, people use it for whatever they want. And people designed it to communicate, but what they communicate about is completely up to the user, of course, as we all know. So faithfulness is a measure, in a way, of how well the designers anticipated what it would be useful for. Because if they made it easy to communicate so that whatever my purpose is, I can do it, they've achieved their purpose as well. So purpose is not necessarily one clean thing, but there's always purpose when a system is named as a system like a forest or designed to serve some kind of purpose. It has boundaries, right? The system I'm using now may or may not be used by somebody else later on, or it may be completely different from a similar system that somebody's using, in California now to talk with somebody in Argentina. It may have the same kind of components, but they have different particular software, hardware, internet protocols and the like. I mentioned components. Components are in a hierarchy. So our forest is one forest, but it has trees, and it has birds, and it has water, and it has leaves on the ground. So each of these is a different component of the forest. Then each tree may be a deciduous or a coniferous. These are ones that drop their leaves or ones that have needles, in case that's hard to translate. So then they have pine trees or elm trees. And then an elm tree will have leaves and branches and a trunk and roots. And a trunk will have veins and bark and other kinds of cellulose cells. In each cell, you get the idea. I can take any component and find more components. And I can take any system like forest, and it's probably part of 50 forests in a country. And those forests are part of a government agency of natural resources, of lakes and forests and mountains. And those are all part of all of the government entities in the country, which is part of a continent, which is part of all of the land on all of the planet, which is one planet in this. And you get my idea. This is why I take it on faith that everything at the end of the day is one system. But I can't look at it that way because I can't see more than what's right in front of me at a given time. But in research, as in life, we have to choose what the level of our system is that we're concerned with and what we want to work on and study as the time comes. But keeping in mind it's a hierarchy lets us realize that whatever we're working on is part of something larger, and it itself has components. I mentioned emergence. I didn't use the word, but that's like being organized. When we organize the parts of a car and we have a car, we can now drive. Driving is an emergent, being able to move, driving is an emergent capability of a bunch of pieces of an auto laying around. So when we organize components, ability to accomplish things emerges. Now, we may take the same components and organize them in different ways so that different things emerge, right? I'm giving a talk now, but we could reorganize this system so that you were giving me a talk or that we were having a meeting. We could have many purposes with the same components. Or we can take these apart and I could take you on a tour of the house that I'm in, or show you one of my books or something like that. Now, in many systems, feedback is a way to maintain equilibrium. This is very important in biology. Cells and organs in the body need to be a certain temperature. They have sensors, or what I'll call sensors, so that as the temperature rises, certain proteins take action so they come back into the range that's comfortable, or if they get too cold, like a thermostat that you might have in your house and almost certainly would have in your business school building or your whatever building you're in, your hotel or whatnot. Disequilibrium is getting out of that range. Now note that we would have certain technical equilibrium with information systems. Am I speaking too loud, too quiet? Are the frames in the transmission too fast or too slow? Is the color off or working, etc.? Things like that. Now, requisite variety means that in order for a system to deal with all of the complexity of the external world, it needs to mirror that amount of complexity. This is a very important point in designing information systems, because if users only have one choice to accomplish a task, one procedure, or one use case, hopefully you're familiar with that term. It's used in object-oriented programming and now in design more generally. So if there's only one use case, your system only needs to address that one use case. But even things that are very simple, like vending machines, will have multiple use cases for the mechanic who fixes them, for the person who stocks the cookies or whatever that goes in the vending machine, and for the customer who buys something. So there's at least 3 use cases. So in addition to being able to put in your coin and getting the item back, someone needs to put the items in. So you need to design in the vending machine the ability to put things in and out. And if you don't design it with all of the use cases in mind, you'll have an inadequate system. But the great thing about design is that when you know all of the use cases, you can find common activities and components that address multiple use cases and limit or reduce the amount of design than if you design a separate system for each use case. Equifinality is also a very important concept in systems. You see, when you build a system, most often there are many ways, a complex system, many times there are many ways to accomplish the same task. So if I were flying to Sao Paulo, I could fly from where I live in St. Louis to Houston in the United States, probably directly to Sao Paulo. Or I could fly to Dallas in the United States, or I could fly to Miami. Or I could drive the Intercontinental Highway to someplace in Panama, somehow get to the next spot in Colombia and drive the rest of the way down. And I don't know if it goes to Sao Paulo or to Chile, but from there I could take a truck or Uber or something. So equifinality in any complex system means there are many ways to accomplish any task. However, the first measure of outcome would be, do we accomplish the task? Because if not, we have to rely on things like learning or intermediate products that are of some value. But then how fast did we do it? How completely did we do it? How many resources do we use doing it? So these become the measures in many systems of the quality and value of the system. So we might have one outcome measure, but very rarely does a system have one and only one measure. Now, we can look at social issues as a component of a socio-technical network system, and we can use technical measures in addition and try to make a list of both as a measure of the socio-technical issues or values. If each component does its job once organized, that's good. If some don't do their job, it's good for us to know that, to know where we need to improve. But if we organize things badly, all of our components may work and still not achieve outcome that we want. Now, if people are part of the system, for example, if I didn't speak English or Portuguese, only, I don't know, Afghanistani, I don't even think that's a language, let's say Turkish, then we wouldn't have communication and wouldn't be achieving our purpose, even if all of us were excellent at our components, because the components are not aligned and aligned well. So if people are in the system and people have free will, and we can work on our technology and make it great, ideally, for our whole system, we still need that organization. And that organization, to me, is fully addressed by neither the technical nor the social components. So I need technology that people can understand and use and want to use, but I also need technology that works when people use it. So the technologists designing have to understand the purpose, and they have to understand the people. Now, there's a whole branch of computer science called human-computer interface, which is very narrowly tied to the using of the computer, mostly in terms of operating it. But very little of that addresses the purpose that people want. Very little of it addresses, how do I invent new organization and new ways to use it to achieve my purposes given how it's built? How do I use what I know using it to give feedback about the technical components, how they can be improved and fine-tuned? So all of these are emergent in socio-technical systems as questions that I would want to know the answer to in particular system design. And if I can know in general ways that are better than other ways to do these things in theory or in conceptual design or in instructions to designers and things like that. So just understanding human psychology doesn't do it. Because if I know someone is a trusting person and someone isn't, and I have 100 users, I'm going to guess those 100 users are going to vary from the highly trusting to the untrusting. And I'm not going to be able to optimize my design for only the trusting and leave out lots of backups, or only the untrusting and put in a lot of backups and guardrails. So you follow my logic. If I thought everybody was going to be honest and a good moral person, I could save a lot of time on my cybersecurity. But sadly, many people, none of them in the room here, of course, are either very self-interested or just evil. And I have to design it, keeping in mind those possibilities in order to make software that people can use faithfully as it's designed or for their improved creations. So human aptitudes and abilities are important, but not determining and insufficient for socio-technical considerations. So there's two basic approaches, each of which has value. The first is looking at each component, the users, the technology components, and then trying to blend what's learned on both. The other is observing the interaction directly, defining purposes, and testing the whole system for what the purpose is trying to achieve. I threw this in as a little bit of an aside. If you like systems theory and the systems approach and want to delve into it further, these two authors and scholars in the 1970s mostly saw that the vast bulk of computer science was about making better technical components. And most organizations purchased and implemented their systems with only the technology and corporate capitalistic profit-making motives in mind. And in some cases, this worked, but at great cost to workers and users. Other times it didn't work because valid user issues were not embedded in the system design. So independently, Enid Mumford and Peter Checklin, both British, I believe, English, I think, came up with systems for what they called socio-technical design. Both were based mostly on arguing for including human factors in designing systems that people had to use, not just designing components. Now, notice I'm not at all against the idea of computer scientists looking at AI algorithms and making improved ones on purely technical grounds. How much computing time they take, how much capacity they require, how easy it is to what's called train them or use the data to populate their parameters, how to interact among what are now thousands or tens of thousands of neural network nodes. The main point that Mumford and Checklin were getting at was elevating the social component in systems. Now, another way to look at this is an alternative to the socio-technical called the socio-material. I don't know of anybody firmly embedded in IT that does socio-material study. Most of the socio-material are people in management and organizational psychology who are only concerned about the emergent and treat the technical as finished. And they tend to treat it as categorical. For example, if you really wanted to know how AI works, you can't test AI. You can give people surveys to see what they think about AI, but you can't really test an AI because there are a dozen different, very strikingly different, working on different principles, flavors of technology, from facial recognition to software translation to neural networks with hundreds of layers to the list is escaping me, but take my word, there are many different things considered AI, and they have different issues, different ethical issues, and different technical issues. So if people do research about AI, they're always in the area of beliefs about AI, or they're using one particular type of AI as if it represented the whole range of them, which it may or may not, in my opinion. So I read a lot of papers as an editor about AI, and I'm always astonished at how often researchers make this mistake of missing the AI as a concept versus AI as a technology. Now, I don't know how many of you have studied database or data planning, but there's a concept that I learned as interaction entity or intersection entity. It's when you have an entity that pertains to an event or action. For example, your grade. The grade is a function of you, but you may have 40 grades in your college program. So it's also a function of the course you're taking or the section of that course. So your 50 grades, you'd have an A in course one, a B in course two, an A in course C. So you have a list of grades, but everybody has A's, B's, C's, and D's, and it doesn't tell you anything, even a vector of them, unless you also know the course. So what are you really measuring in your grade? The grade then is an attribute of your taking the course, not of you and not of the course. Now, I spend weeks on this with my undergraduate students when I used to teach database. So I'll let it go at this point. But just trust me that when you look at events, actions, activities, and processes, these can be viewed as entities with their own attributes. So in this sense, looking at courses is like looking at technologies. Looking at students is looking at the socio part. But it's not until they take action together or people act on the technology that you get the effects, which also include the organization of them. And we use as a surrogate of direct measurement of the organization, the process attribute, which in this case is B, which says how well the student did in the course, but doesn't actually measure the process of what that student accomplished. I put here, alone the airplane and human just sit on the tarmac. It's when the human is trained, understands how to, operate, and then has all the equipment and things needed, like jet fuel and the runway and all of the other things clear, that you can actually get flying. Flight then is an activity which emerges from all of the components that go into an airplane. Another, if this interests you, another place to learn a lot about this is a philosopher, sociologist named Latour, Latour, and he writes a lot about looking at specific incidents as a way to understand larger truths and see patterns. It's a little obscure, and he wrote in French, So I don't know how good the translation is. I read it in English, but it's he's a great philosopher in my opinion. So in IS research, where computer science tends to focus on the technical component, with exceptions, ACM has about 35 special interest groups, and they include computing for information systems personnel, which is interested in human resource issues. I was the chair of that group for 3 or 4 years. It's a great group, and it looks at the skills and aptitudes, working conditions of the people who work in IT departments mainly. They have another group on handicap and diversity. And they look at things like how do we make available to all kinds of handicapped people, whether it's wheelchair access or blind or hearing or attention span. How do we make tools and systems available to them? And they have, as I mentioned, human-computer interface. How do I make systems usable in general? They also have a social group that looks at the effects of computing on society. To my taste, they're still a bit on the technical side, but they make an effort. And all of these are groups very much worth joining, if especially at a younger stage in your career, in order to be part of a community that has some common goals. And again, synergies are created by joining these sorts of groups. So even if it's not sanctioned by your school or job, what you learn and the context you make can provide a basis for being more successful at what your job does in fact demand. Now, I'd argue that most socio-technical systems worth studying are complex. Now, we take things that are mystifying, like why do people buy why do people buy Oracle instead of SAP for their enterprise system? How do they install it? What happens when it doesn't meet a need? So these are all activities that require either temporary or permanent human systems, human socio-technical systems. And I would argue that these and seeing patterns in them and providing advice to practitioners how to do these better is the purpose of IT or IS, information systems or information technology research, is to help people do these things better. Now, that's not in agreement with the bulk of publications, which I think are more about bringing social science technique to finding truths about how we operate IS. Nothing against truth, but I'd rather look at the slopes on a point on the curve than pretend that we don't have a curve but have a straight line. So to me, taking a complex phenomenon, mapping it as a system, what are its components? What are its dynamics? How do the components contribute to creating results? Where do we influence those components, human and technical? To me, is the blueprint for successful IT research. Now, this is very difficult to do with surveys because we have to know what they are in order to survey people, to write the questions. And if we don't know what it is, it therefore becomes very difficult. So this is more the area of design science, which is the process of self-examination and recording and looking for patterns in the design process, and case studies, looking at particular cases in detail and describing what happened and emerging with pictures of the system and how they work. So in my view, journals should be publishing case studies that plausibly relate to a variety of different kinds of systems, so that what we learn in one, people in practice are not stupid. First of all, there are students, so they had to be smart enough to decide to take our programs, which means they must be very smart. At least I like to think so. So a practitioner can read a case, especially if it's simplified a bit, taking out all the jargon and fanciness and trying to prove things. And understand that that case was a different time and place. And extrapolate for themselves if there's value in what they need to apply next. We often teach with case studies in our MBA courses or master's courses in computer science. I don't know if they do computer science or not, but I think they do a lot of hands-on activities in computer science. So these cases illustrate what a particular person did in a particular problem, and that's what practitioners face. Now, having general rules that you might apply gives you a starting place for solving your problem, but it doesn't solve your problem. It almost never tells you enough to solve your problem. That's where what you learn in your expertise, or someday down the road, the AI will be able to do, is to take the general, translate it into your circumstances. It's easy enough to come up with general statements that are the best statement of what we believe to be true, and then test them and keep improving them based on our tests. Our tests being a prediction of what we should see if it's true, testing, comparing what we predicted with what we found. If it's supportive, we've reinforced our original statement. If it's refuting, we try to understand why. And if it's equivocal, it also raises new questions. The point is, how do you take a line and get narrower and narrower and closer to what would be the slope of a point on a curve? You keep doing more tests. Now, most things aren't worth it. Most things, we do one test, we say, fine, close enough. But a lot of things are worth it. How to implement a well-designed system. Nobody knows the answer. We don't really have very good heuristics for this. And we don't have very many case studies, as far as I know. And I don't know everything, although I act like it, especially at home when people are listening to me and eating breakfast and have nowhere else to go. Let me give you a few examples. AI transparency. So AI typically is a component in a socio-technical network. What do I mean? Let's say you had an AI to take student applications for admission to your program. Now, you don't need AI to do that. You can take 1,000 applications, screen out the 100 that aren't even meeting the minimum standard, screen in the 500 that not only meet it, but are clear, fine. And then take the other 400 and separate them, maybe rank them from the top 100, the medium 200, and the bottom 100. And then manually go through each one. Now, an AI might get that down to 15 or 20 that need manual review. Okay, but notice that at some point in this system, probably a person can go in, scan the 500, look on one dimension or another for an outlier. Maybe somebody doesn't have that good grades, but has wonderful test scores. Or they're a veteran, and at least in many schools, veterans get preference, get some extra points. The thinking being that they're more mature and a little older, and will, even if they're not smarter, will have a good effect on all the other students, maybe bring better work habits, this sort of thing. So in a system where finally you don't need any humans, you don't need necessarily, if AI has become so reliable that it picks out the 700 students to admit, and you don't need human intervention, or you test it and it does a better job of picking out the 700 that have done well after 4 years of an undergraduate program versus any human or team, and you just go to it entirely. Now you're not in a socio-technical system. Now you're in a technical system that leaves out the person. Okay. So to me, at least where we are now with AI, we always, as far as I know, except maybe we're starting to get to where driverless cars are being made that supposedly leave the human out. I don't want to be on the road with them. I think the theory is Yeah, they'll get in a few crashes, a few people will die, but we'll learn from those and just get better and better. My ethics would say that's an unacceptable way to test these systems, but it may be what we end up having in fact anyway. I don't have a problem with someday down the road, AI systems have 1,000 deaths a year on the highways, because now without AI systems we have 50,000 in the U.S. So when your time is up, your time is up. But if you can go from 50,000 to 1,000, all the better. Especially as I get older, I can't wait for being driven in a driverless car where I can, read philosophy and just wake up the next morning in New Orleans and go to a party, go to Mardi, their slender version of Mardi Gras compared to yours. Okay, so that's an example of an AI, of a system. Now, a computer scientist might look at the AI component and try to make it faster, use less resources, and that's all good. But at this time, an information system with human components will do no better, no matter how good the AI technology is, no better than their ability to monitor, to put in what they want as a request. ChatGPT will give you drivel if you put in a really crummy search term. If you put in a really good one, you'll get something useful. At this point, ChatGPT is part of a human computer system. So I know many faculty members are now saying you can use ChatGPT, but if it gives you drivel, you get a bad grade. And I don't care that you didn't write it. Now, on the other hand, the downside is if you do a good search term, you get a good essay from ChatGPT, you get a good grade, what have you really learned? Well, you've learned how to make a good search term. And as an employee someday, that may be more valuable than writing a good essay. I don't know. I mean, when I was a student, we weren't allowed to use calculators. Now it's laughable. 99% of stats you can't do without a computer or SAS or R or something. So these things change. And so I'm just giving you an example of the kind of research an IT person would do. That's very important. What is the human role in ChatGPT? How does the human do human things in order to get the computer to fulfill the ultimate purposes? What are good purposes to use it for? It's a human issue also. How can you build guardrails into ChatGPT? I don't know if you have Khan Academy in Brazil. It's an online tutoring service across dozens or hundreds of topics that's run by a nonprofit company started by a guy named Khan. And they now have AI generated tutors that students can work with. And they've built in techniques so that a student works with the AI to build a paper. But if the student turns in a paper that was just downloaded from somewhere, the AI tells the professor and parents that there's evidence of cheating. So this is part of the socio-technical system, that the purpose of achieving student interaction that helps and tutors them rather than substituting AI for their thinking is part of the system design. And I would argue that many of the people at the Khan Academy do only the technology and engineering. He was saying on a radio program I listened to that the challenge is always to get them to think about the purpose and the value being created. And this is an area where IS can do research and provide immense value by finding patterns, generic rules, and specific ways and cases that have been helpful. I'd love, for example, to do a case study with Khan Academy on how they go about finding purposes and then translating those into technological guardrails that are helpful to them. A second one is workarounds. I had a sabbatical in Germany near SAP. the ERP software builder. And many of our students at the school I was temporarily at were engineers at SAP. And I'd ask them, what are your biggest problems? And I always got two answers. The first was they hated self-organizing teams. There are many, many articles saying that Germans love self-organized teams. They hated it. Why? Because they spent all their time making stupid decisions or decisions on stupid issues instead of doing their job. They loved having a manager whose job was just doing all of the piddly stuff so they could concentrate on things they like to do. But we'll let that go for the moment. Second is workarounds. Now, some workarounds are necessary because there are laws. Germany has very strict laws about data, about personnel, and about accounting. More strict than in the United States, and I'm guessing more strict than Brazil, although I don't know. You may have very strict laws. So, person's working at an accounting firm, and they need to accomplish something, and the software won't let them do that. It may be that the way they want to do it is not appropriate, and they need to find a new way. Or it may be the way they're doing it is appropriate, but was not built into the system. In either case, they cannot do their job with the software as it exists, right? So they create a workaround. Maybe they do calculations or something off the system and then just put the result in. In any case, this is viewed as a very serious issue by companies, or they ignore it and just take their chance that somebody's doing something wrong. Or sometimes workarounds are just for convenience or for doing naughty things. So this is a very difficult situation for companies. But again, I think you have to look at this as a socio-technical system. Your technology has constraints where what your purpose is in trying to do is not accommodated. Now, of course, the obvious thing is to revise the software. But even before that, the more obvious thing is to investigate whether it's a problem in the software. Maybe there is a component that does it, and the accountant doesn't know that it's there, or doesn't know how to use it, or just hasn't been trained on it. So diagnosing the root cause of the problem between the user and the technology is a first step in the redesign and enhancement of that socio-technical system so that the purpose can be accomplished. Now, notice that the bulk of research on workarounds is kind of psychological. Why do people do workarounds? Rather than socio-technical about how do you investigate the technology and human system as integrated so that the emergent properties are successful and not problematic. The third is metrics. And I'm very skeptical about most metrics. There's a concept called KPI, key performance indicators. And most companies, as far as I can tell, use very technical ones. How many books did you read? How many pages did you write on your paper? These are not bad, but what's the point of writing 1,000 pages if it's nonsense or if it doesn't accomplish the job? And almost nobody has a way to measure whether what you're writing is any good. I mean, I may read it and give you my opinion, and it may be that we can say the purpose is to satisfy your professor, and that's fine, or to sell 10,000. I mean, you may have drivel and sell 100,000 copies because some people like drivel. I don't know how to translate drivel. Nonsense. Junk. So where computer science will focus on better metrics or analytics, more sophisticated ways to do regression analysis or whatever it might be, what we're measuring is where I think the value really is. We have a big analytics area at our school. And when I meet students, I say, well, how do you know what to measure? They have no clue. They're just given data sets. Okay, now that you have the outcome to regression, how do you explain that to somebody who's never heard of statistics? And how do you translate into making a decision? Okay, so these 3 factors outweigh these other 5 factors by having stronger p-values or r-squareds. So what? What does that tell you about what you're going to do next? They don't know. They don't have a clue. Because the system is often defined as just the metrics, rather than the socio-technical system, from what data you collect and have available to how you gather that, to what you do with it statistically, to what the statistics mathematically say, to how you interpret those, to how you translate the interpretation into jumping into making a choice. The socio-technical system from data gathering to choice is not well known. We have a journal called Decision Support Systems. I haven't found a paper in the last 5 years that dealt with organizational decision making and how to go from the first step to the last. The vast bulk of it is either about humans and whether they're more reluctant to use one kind of recommender system than another, or it's about recommender systems and how to capture better preference data and use that to make better recommendations. But it's not about how a person that wants a hotel for a conference in Sao Paulo investigates what hotels there are, has decision criteria, has available decision criteria, can read comments, can implement that decision, and then make the actual arrangements. That whole process is very rarely investigated. That's what a socio-technical investigation would look like. Now, note that I could assume you're using travel.com, or I could assume that you're using travel experts or some system, but there's nothing says a user has to. Assuming that more than one are available, do users try multiple ones? The second travel that they do, maybe next year, it's to Bahia. And so that week travel, maybe they just go right to the way they did it last time. So maybe your system will have reminders. You did it this way last time. It's fine. Do you want to try something else? You follow my logic here. So metrics and analytics are also an area that can be opened up to more of a socio-technical approach. Renata, how am I doing on time?
Well, we'll still have about 5 minutes.
Oh, that's all?
to finish the session.
Well, would you mind if we just shift into questions and comments? Because I have many more slides and can keep going for hours. Please go ahead.
Okay. Well, does anybody have any questions from now? Comments? Impressions? Perguntas? Pode fazer em português também. Manu, alguém tem a Manu lá? Ó. Pode ser, mas faz aí no coisa.
Nossa, minha voz. Eu queria saber se, principalmente nessa área de inteligência artificial, se ele enxerga que hoje em dia o componente social ele tem sido uma preocupação e como que ele vê isso.
Okay, let me translate the question of our undergrad student here from São Paulo, Fred. She's asking about artificial intelligence, about the studies and the development that we are having today. If the human aspect is being considered or not, what is your opinion on that?
Thank you very much for the question. I love questions and answering them. It's my favorite hobby in the world, and I really appreciate you asking. I think that the bulk of artificial intelligence is in 2 forms, research. One is how to make better AI components. You find dozens and dozens of these in ACM publications. They're of value. The second are almost philosophical. What should be our rules about AI? Do you need to translate the answers, Renata?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Do you understand? We can understand it perfectly.
Okay, thank you. The second are almost philosophical. But I know of almost nothing. Oh, there is a small group that look at how do you implement an AI program in an organization. So let's say you have a large bank, and the bank says, okay, can I do AI to help me decide whether there's money laundering attempts, right? And then I can do an AI to say, are these investments worth investing in? Like buying houses or something. But they could also say, in the next 10 years, we're going to build 10 to 100 AI applications for different things. Should I create a department of AI? Should I create a staff that does AI and moves from project to project? Or should each AI project be in the department that is concerned with that? And so a few people have started looking at this, but very indirectly and mostly in platitudes, very generally. So I think that there's a lot of room for more study of AI and particular purposes. So, for example, in the medical area, there's a lot of AI regarding X-rays and feeding the information about X-rays to the AI. It can actually detect cancer more often than humans and detect when there's no cancer more accurately than humans. And so AI is starting to get embedded in these. But I don't know of anyone who's written about a standard procedure for doing this kind of testing. You follow my logic here. Everybody knows that we can test each item, but are there patterns of testing AI in medicine or banking, or ways of organizing AI in a industry or in a company that get added synergies? People philosophically talk about risks that are involved, but so I don't know if I've answered your question. I've talked a lot about AI in research. I think the biggest limitation is what journals are interested in publishing. Can I ask you all a question?
Yes, of course.
How many of you are teaching or plan to teach? Would you raise your hand?
Teaching or planning to teach. Quem está dando aula e está planejando? We have a lot of people here.
Yeah, it looks like 20 or 30%, maybe half. So a lot of what I'm talking about in terms of the teaching is assuming that you're going to teach more at a university level, where the job is about developing new knowledge as well as conveying existing knowledge to students. And so that's what research is about to me, is developing new knowledge as well as conveying it. Do we have time for more questions and comments?
More questions? Mais perguntas? Well, I have one question, may I?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so do it. No, there's another question from the audience. Okay.
Vou fazer em inglês mesmo. I'm a statistical undergraduate here in UFJF, and we do a lot of causal inference in our data analysis. And I don't see you and the information system people use that much in their analysis, and it's so important for us. How do you see this?
Thank you. I see this much like what I was talking about with analytics. There's a lot of room for testing the algorithm, the software. What I'm arguing is that how is somebody going to use the result of better inferencing? When is it appropriate to do better inferencing? And if the inferencing is a component in a larger human system, what's its contribution? And I'll give you an example. In project management, there's an awful lot of research about how to do better and better mathematical grouping of projects into a portfolio. But it relies on data that almost no project manager has. The cost of gathering that data is viewed as not nearly worthwhile compared to doing an approximate decision on the portfolio. You follow my logic? So the system explains why people don't care in actual use about this vast amount of research, because they can't use it because they don't have the data. Whereas a case study of a particular company using this successfully would start by showing where the data comes from, how much it cost, which could be a lot, but if you save your one project from going bad, it could more than pay for it. You see the logic there. But you don't know that if you haven't looked at the whole system. Now, that said, as an undergraduate, it's not bad to master the technical components and keep in the back of your mind that they fit into a larger picture. That makes sense?
Yes, thank you. Another question?
Hi, I'm trying to ask in English. My question is about futurist studies on socio-technical approach to information systems. What trends or theories do you recommend to approach the curve in the slope?
That's a great question. Thank you. Future studies is the area I've been taking up for the last 5 years. And when I was in college, there was a very famous book called Future Shock. I can't imagine it's not translated into Portuguese. It was written in the 1960s. And the key message was, not only is the world changing, but the rate of change is increasing. And if you know Moore's law, we've had a sharp increase at more than linear growth in computing for 60 years now. So I think future studies is extremely important for IS and computer science, because the society we have now reacts to all of the evolution of technology, and I believe will continue to. So thinking about what the technological evolution may bring is important for our design of technology now, and for preparing us for what the future may be like. Now, in order to get started with this, first I would recommend you contact Renata and ask for my email address, because I have bibliographies and syllabus for my course. There are only a handful of universities in the world that specialize in this. We have one in the United States, just one. Future studies can be embedded in lots of other things. But there are two main aspects. There's about 5 aspects, but 2 main ones. One is long-term. Now, think about when I was your age, Star Trek was new. And all these things were impossible. And now half of them exist, like the little thing they push to communicate. It's not exactly like our digital device, but it's like that. So what will a Star Trek in 30 years be like? Right? What we say would be on the Enterprise in 30 years. The second is near term, and it's called forecasting. And you might study that a little bit in operations management if you're in a business school, or in statistics. If you have data, like the gentleman was talking about inferential analytics, if you have data, you can project what that will look like into the future. You can project if it keeps going the way it is, or you can create all sorts of cyclical and other projections. Businesses use this a lot. If I'm the Panama Canal, I can use this to predict the rate of ships going through the canal. And if I predict the rate of ships, I can predict my revenue and then my budget. You follow the logic. I can predict whether I need to widen the canal, etc. Okay. We're just talking, when we were in Panama last year, we were talking about this with some of the scholars there. A third one is looking at how people today feel about the future and using that to make guesses about what might be in store, or interventions to create more awareness of the future in people. But I tell you, I've been teaching a course in future studies for the last like 3 years. And I just love, this is the best course I've taught in my career. I could keep teaching this one. It's very socio-technical because it's about the evolution of technology, but then thinking about what that implies for things we can do. And when we can do new things, what does that imply for society? And as society changes, what does that imply about what new technologies we'll want? So I don't know if this responds to what you were asking, but it gives me great faith in the future of the world that this is of interest to you.
Okay, thank you, Fred. Well, unfortunately, I don't think we'll still have time for more questions. So I would like to thank you a lot for sharing with us your perspectives on social technical research. This is something that we as a community, we need to learn more, to go deeper into the theory and the concepts. We need to face the challenge of approaching humans, approaching organizations, approaching society. We need to face the challenge of publishing this kind of research. That's also a challenge in my point of view. And I think that your talk helped us a lot to motivate us to overcome all these challenges on social technical research. Thank you a lot, Fred. Well, let's.
Well, thank you to you all. I really appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you and have enjoyed every minute of it. I hope, I don't see anybody on their phone, and I don't see anybody visibly asleep. So those are my key performance indicators.
Thank you a lot, Fred. I hope we'll have the time to discuss more on this subject on the future. Okay? Thank you.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Gente, deixa eu só comentar antes da gente sair. A gente colocou uns QR Codes nas salas. Acho que a Carol colocou em alguns lugares. Se vocês quiserem mandar comentários ou impressões para o Fred, vocês podem colocar lá em texto, em vídeo, tá? Tem uns links para colocar, português, inglês, aí depois eu encaminho para ele, tá bom? Obrigada, pessoal, pela presença.